If you see the lines outside of the Apple stores every time a new iPhone comes out, you would think that change is the lifeblood of everybody these days. But try to get that iPhone user to switch to an Android, and you'll know what real change management is all about. Hi, I'm Tom. Welcome to my channel, where we talk about continuous improvement in an industrial setting. And in this video, we'll be talking about change management. And to do this, we'll go over more the emotional side of change to the person undergoing it, an organizational framework, how to see change in a broader perspective, and a real practical tool to just get one change to actually stick. Now, if we talk about the emotional effect change can have on a person, it's best to use the change model as a framework. It's also known as the 5 stages of grief. And basically what it says is that as soon as you have a change, there's a bit of a shock. And then the first thing, your mood goes up a little bit because you're in denial. And when you realize that this change is really happening, your motivation goes down when you start to get frustrated or even a bit depressed. But then when you start to experiment a bit and really try maybe this new situation isn't too bad, your mood will climb up again and your competence levels as well. And then you will see that people adopt and integrate this new way of working into their own routines. And if it's a positive change, your motivation will even come out stronger than it was before the change. Now, the main thing this model teaches us is how to react in different stages of the change. As long as someone's still in denial, you really have to align with the person, open up about how the change is really going through and how it will affect them. When someone's frustrated, the best thing to do is to really open up communication and share the positive aspects of this change and why this is the way forward. Also, communicate back about the problems that he is feeling and the things that you can do to help him. And when somebody is already in the low point of their motivation, that's the time to just go for pure motivation. Let them know that there is help, that there is support around, and that they can try a bit. Motivate them to try a little bit and make sure the support network is in order. Now, when people start to experiment, this is the time to help them on a skill level. It's the logical time for a second round of training, and also make sure that you teach them where the tricks are when they make a mistake, and that it's not such a problem. So help them not so much on the motivational side, but on knowledge, skills, and make sure that their first successes are celebrated. And then you will see that a person becomes more competent, will try more, and will usually do it right. But it will still sometimes go wrong. And when somebody is really trying to adopt it into his habits, this is the time to make sure that failure is accepted. So support him when things go wrong, but as long as they are still managing more or less, step back a bit, let them learn from their own successes and mistakes to really be able to incorporate it into their own routines. Now, one of the things also with this curve is that it will not be the same for everyone. Even in the same change, you will have people who go through it a lot faster, slower, who sink deeper in their motivation, who are not so much touched by it. It's good to know that everyone will go through the basic steps. And as change managers, there are 2 things we can really do to help. By having the correct communication, we can shorten the time that it takes a person to go from frustration into experimentation and adoption. And the most critical part is that in this low depression point, people can actually shoot through and really not adopt the change at all. And this, of course, is what we try to prevent. This change curve is especially useful for when you're guiding somebody through a change. So really useful for managers and coaches, and if you are trying to get specific people on board in your change initiative. Now, the next model we'll look at tells more about the organizational side of change. And you might be familiar with it. It's the 8-step model by Kotter, which says that you first need to create a sense of urgency. Then you build a guiding coalition, so a change team, make a very compelling vision, really communicate that vision often and broadly. Then you come into action and make some improvements happen and take away obstacles. You assure that you get your first wins to show people that the changes are positive. You have to follow up with sustained wins to also show that the program has a real long-lasting added benefit. And then you work on a complete change of the culture to incorporate the new practices real deep in your organization. So this is less about how change affects a single person and more about what you need to do to have a whole change program really work in your organization. And one of the first things we see, especially when looking at the first 4 steps and number 8, is that you really have to involve management. Now, in a large organization with several factories, it is possible to start at one factory, but even then you need to get executive management on board as well. But definitely for the scope where you're trying to implement the change, you need to really get buy-in from the management who is responsible for that scope. And they need to feel that change is necessary. This is what the sense of urgency means. It's not about maybe we can do a little better. No, it's we need to improve and change some fundamental ways of doing our business. And the lesson from step 2 is that in your steering committee, your guiding team, you need a couple of real heavyweight leaders of the organization. And when talking about communication, there is again a strong role also to be played by the continuous improvement team, so the supporters, in that we need to facilitate as much communication as possible. And there are some nice examples in Kotter's book, so make sure that in all meetings you have a little bit of communication, that questions are answered from how the division looks at it by both executive management members as well as shop floor managers and basically all the specialists in your organization. And here you can really support and make sure that your change program has both very visible parts in communication, but also that small parts pop up basically in all the moments of contact and in other projects. Now, most of us are already familiar with the action phase, getting your wins and your lasting wins, making things sustainable. But when we plan improvement actions within our program, we should take into account that especially your first projects should have a high chance of success and should be very visible. Those two are key to making your first wins visible. And this might sometimes even mean that you go not for the most profitable saving project and definitely not for the most difficult thing you can tackle, because you need those first successes. So when you are steering towards an improvement roadmap, also take this into consideration in the discussions. And the final key part of this organizational change model is that culture change is the last step. So we often say that you first have to change the culture before you can change the way of work. But Kotter says, no, the real culture change happens after. You have to first change how you work, show the results, make it a new habit, and then the culture of your whole organization will change. So maybe he means something else than what we usually talk about, but it's a very clear message that after you do a couple of years of visual improvement projects, it is still needed to go the extra mile and make sure that it becomes the new way of things for your whole organization. And that is a very difficult part, so it does require continued attention. Since this model takes a broad organization view and handles more of a long-term vision, it's very useful to take into account when constructing your change program. So when you are changing, for instance, your continuous improvement methodologies within an organization, or really structure things. When we look at one specific change project, change initiative, it is better to look at the 4 puzzle pieces of the puzzle of change. This will ensure that one single change will be adopted and be sustainable. Now, to really adopt a change, I need to have the systems and tools that I need for this new way of working. I have to know what to do, be trained. I have to see other people around me also adopt this same change, and I have to want it, to understand why this is good for me. So this part of skills and abilities, I think, is quite self-explanatory. This is about training, about giving people the competences that they need to successfully adopt the new way of working. What we mean with systems and structures is basically that you make it easy to do the right thing. So you have the correct tools. Those tools are easy to use. And in fact, what you strive for is that the new way of working will be easier to do than the old way of working. So basically, the lazy person will try to do the new, better thing. This will generally cost the most money and effort to really put in place, but that will give you a more sustainable change. And in the end, will probably become cheaper again. Now, the best things we can do to ensure good examples in leadership is to really take middle management along with the journey and let our managers present and train their people, and also reward for good behavior. So we basically have our standard 3 sermon, carrot and stick, where you really have to talk to people, tell them that the new way of working is going to be the way, make sure that people understand that it's important for you and for their own managers that they change their way of working. Then you need to reward people who adopt the new way of doing things, and you need to make it absolutely clear that continuing in the old way will no longer be accepted. And to drive understanding and commitment, we need to focus our communication from the perspective of the person who is going to go through the change. So make sure we describe the advantages to them and let them know that we thought about the obstacles that they are going to face and did everything we could to minimize those. Now you need all 4 pieces of this puzzle, but you can compensate somewhat. So if you can make one of the pieces a lot stronger, you might get away with not giving too much effort to one of the other pieces. And one of the best examples for this is when you make your structures in such a way that you basically have poka-yoke standards, where there is no other way of working than the correct way. It will require a lot less training. It will probably also require less leadership. But on the other hand, if you have a difficult standard in a complex process, it will require a lot of training and coaching and willpower from the people who are living through the change. So then you need to compensate the other way. And on this topic, I'd also like to give you a piece of advice, which is spend the extra time to make a standard or a training that much better. Because in the end, if you're going to teach it to 10, 50, 100 people, you want to make, for instance, their hour of training really useful, it means that if you have to spend an extra half day on that, it's nothing in comparison. It will be time well spent. And if you can really improve a working standard that will afterwards be used by everybody day in, day out, it is worth it to spend several hours on it or even days to make it easier to improve those things. And also, we should not forget, we will also be continuously improving those standards and trainings. So make sure you get it good the first time, but you will get your chance to make it better afterwards. So we have discussed what effect change has on individuals, how to model it for a whole organization, and how you can make sure that an individual change will stick. If you've learned something from this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I will also put a link to Kotter's 8-step change model in the description. And please write in a comment which of these models is the most useful to you. And maybe you also have a piece of advice for our community on how to positively affect change. For now, I wish you the best of luck in managing change, and as always, enjoy the journey.